Anthony Joshua keeps repeating that he's willing to vacate one of his belts as unified champion to pursue a big championship fight. What up, fight world? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Make sure you smash the like button. Also subscribe to the channel for the latest and greatest in boxing. If you want to become part of the gang notification gang, please hit the bell icon. Shout out to the super chats, channel donations, the Venmo donations, the Cash App, and the Patreon family. We working. Now, Joshua regained his titles beating Andy Ruiz Jr. in a, kind of a stay safe performance, but he did it coming off a horrible performance in June of last year. So that's what's more important. Joshua did an interview with Sky Sports, and he says, I quote, "I always said the belts do not represent me. I will stand as a champion, even if I have to give one up," meaning one of the belts. "It will give me an opportunity to face another world champion. I've beaten 4 world champions on my record now. If I give up a belt, it creates more history and entertainment. If I have to, I'll give it away, but then I'll get it back again." He says Tyson is going to be back in the ring with Wilder on February 22nd. So let me break this thing down. Joshua, I don't know who's in his ear. I figure who's in his ear, but I don't know specifically behind closed doors what's happening. Why does he keep referring to having to give a belt up, like vacate a belt? And he's saying to pursue another. He says, "I will stand as a champion even if I have to give a belt up. It will give me an opportunity to face another world champion." What? Like, I'm not the smartest brother in the world, but last time I checked, the sanctioning bodies, unless they're corrupt or unless they have some kind of other agenda, they will move out of the way if it becomes an issue where you are pursuing a unification or undisputed. I understand mandatories. I understand how the game works. I understand what the word mandatory means. But to my knowledge, a unification, especially a unification for undisputed in a division, having one face, one champion, one name, like Wilder says, that would trump everything. So why does Joshua continually play this card that he has to drop one of his belts? The reality is, I think Joshua was exposed versus Andy Ruiz, and now his people are advising him, and he doesn't even see this, but this is what I think is going on. He was exposed versus Andy Ruiz, and they came very close to losing their hold, the Eddie Hearn hold on the heavyweight division. So it sounds like people are in Anthony Joshua's ear telling him, hey, you got these mandatories. You're not going to be able to fight all your mandatories. And if you want to pursue the big fights, tell the people this, and you might have to drop one of your belts, but it's okay. You'll get it back later. And to be honest, the mandatories, one of them at least is Alexander Usyk, who is with Eddie Hearn in Matchroom. So to me, it sounds like Joshua coming so close. He met defeat, but coming so close to really being kind of irrelevant. If he would have took 2 back-to-back Ruiz losses, I don't know how he would have bounced back from that. So I really feel like this is Eddie Hearn and Barry Hearn. This is their attempt to stay relevant in the heavyweight division and not have all their eggs in the Joshua basket, because it was proven that Joshua can be beaten. Andy Ruiz did it. His punch resistance, Joshua didn't look great. He didn't look durable. It looked like he quit in the fight. And even though Joshua got his belts back, he still didn't look like the same Joshua. And based on that performance and the performance before, basically both Ruiz fights, I wouldn't surmise, or I wouldn't predict, if I was a betting man and let's say I had all the money in my bank account, I wouldn't, based on how Joshua looked in last year in his performances, I wouldn't bet no big money or life savings that Joshua won't taste another recent defeat, like upcoming defeat depending on who he fights. And now if he fights unknown people or something, then there's a chance. But if he fights the Daniel Dubois, the Tyson Furies, Wilders, Luis Ortiz, Dillian White even, in a rematch, those would all be highly dangerous fights where he definitely stands the chance of losing. So I think what's happening is Eddie Hearn and Barry Hearn realize that the jig is up with Anthony Joshua and he's not who they build him as, and they're kind of creating a backup plan. Usyk just moved up from cruiserweight to heavyweight, and I think they want to try to make Joseph Parker Usyk or Usyk versus Derek Chisora for a vacant title, and they're telling Anthony Joshua to release one of the belts and gassing him up like, oh, you can get it back. It's because you have mandatories, and they want him to vacate the belt to spread the belts. So this is not good for boxing, and it is, if this is in fact the case and Joshua vacates his belt, I think that's poor for the heavyweight division, because instead it's just like what Canelo's doing at middleweight. DAZN, they're really going to have to get people who know boxing and aggressively attack this year, because if they have another year like last year, it's going to be horrible. But same thing with Canelo. Canelo had all of the belts at middleweight except for the WBO, which Demetrius Andrade had. And instead of him fighting Andrade, they picked Kovalev in another division, and he lost belts, before that. This is maybe one of the reasons, but if he would have announced he was fighting Andrade, then he could have probably kept all of his belts, but he didn't. So he had mandatories due up, like Jermall Charlo, WBC mandatory, didn't fight him, wasn't willing to fight him. So he became a franchise champion, got stripped, and Jermall Charlo became the full WBC champion. And then you have Deryevchenko. He spent so time fooling with Kovalev that when his other mandatory with the IBF, Deryevchenko came up, he didn't have too much time to negotiate, and they couldn't agree upon a price, and they stalled out at negotiations at the table over price, and it fell out, and he was stripped of that belt. Him and his team made a deal with the IBF. Hey, if we don't have a deal on the table by X, Y, and Z date, then we'll just give up the belt. And that's what they did. Golovkin later fought Deryevchenko, got whooped, and then they robbed Deryevchenko and gave Golovkin the belt. But that's what happened. So Canelo, he was one fight, one click away from undisputed. And if DAZN would have put Triple G in with Andrade, then they could have had the winner fight the winner of Canelo Jacob, and they would have had a middleweight fight that encompassed all of the belts at middleweight, and it would have been justified, and it would have been a big fight for boxing. But they didn't listen to your boy Ego, and you see what happened. All the belts got spread out. And this happened with Triple G too. At one point, he had all the belts. The only belt he needed was Billy Joe Saunders' belt. But he started chasing Canelo, and then he ended up losing to Canelo. And Triple G came close to undisputed, but close but no cigar. Now with Joshua, I think his situation is slightly different. This is another instance where he has the opportunity to become undisputed, but they don't have enough faith in Joshua, Eddie Hearn being Rematch Room, and Barry Hearn. They don't have enough faith in him that I think they want him to relinquish one of the belts, because they know they could probably make a fight with Usyk for a vacant belt, and now that puts him in the division. So if Joshua stays winning and Usyk, he'd probably be favored over like a guy like Derek Chisora if he can match something like that for the vacant belt. They're trying to hash it out, probably pay one of the sanctioning, one of the companies to authorize that, or rank Derek Chisora or Joseph Parker, and they're trying to make a fight like that so it spreads the belts out instead of unifying for undisputed and making Wilder Fury winner fight Joshua, who has all the other belts. They want Joshua because they're not, in my opinion, they're not comfortable with him having all the belts, because if he has all the belts, like for example, he probably has to fight Kubrat Pulev next. That's a top ranked fighter. So if he goes into the Kubrat Pulev fight And, Pulev has some power. So what if Pulev stopped him? Then guess what? You're right back where you started with Ruiz, and all the belts are gone. But it's just like a football play, like a flea flicker. You pass it to someone else. You ever seen this happen in the Patriot game? They did the kickoff, and they had no more time on the clock, so they had to try to keep the play alive. So they just keep tossing the ball to somebody, hoping they can run it back for a touchdown. And I think that's what it is. I think they want Joshua. They don't trust Joshua to keep winning. So again, they're trying to break up the belts. That's what Eddie Hearn is doing. That's what I see. They want him to break up the belts because it's a liability. If Joshua loses, then he loses all of his belts all at once. Now Eddie Hearn's going to have to go through it again, and then Joshua's going to have to beat, just like the Ruiz situation, which was too close for comfort. Now Joshua would have to, let's say, like I said, a likely possibility for next is Joshua versus Kubrat Pulev. Pulev is with Top Rank. So it's going to be a nightmare because that, again, if Joshua were to lose to Pulev, which is not out of the realm of possibilities, Ruiz turned up in poor shape. So it's hard to gauge if Joshua has really corrected everything. And then there were rumors about him in sparring both camps and stuff like that. It just so happens Andy Ruiz, didn't put himself in a position to win. So my theory is this. They don't want Joshua fighting another outside person with all the belts just on the off chance that it's definitely a possibility he could lose or not be the same fighter, And then if he loses, then he loses all of his belts again to another promoter's fighter. So what they would rather do is the other mandatory is Usyk. So try to get Joshua stripped of one of the belts. So that keeps them alive. That keeps rematch room alive. Because if Usyk now has a belt or has the opportunity at a belt and they can make a matchroom fight like Joseph Parker, Derek Chisora versus Usyk, something like that, then that keeps them in the game. Even if Joshua were to lose, then they can jump to the Usyk train and be like, okay, Usyk's a champion. And then, ideally in a perfect world, Joshua beats Kubrat Pulev, successfully defends, and then let's say Usyk wins, and then they would be able to make a fight with Usyk as a champion, like, oh, he's a new heavyweight champion versus Joshua. And I think that's what it is. So they have no intentions of fighting Wilder Fury winner. That much is evident, especially if it's Wilder. We've known that for a while. And this is the game. They're trying to hold on to their stake. And I can't co-sign any promoter that instead of trying to bring clarity to the division, they'd rather break up the belts. They would rather see separation of the belts. It's like the Avengers with the Infinity Stones. They'd rather see the Infinity Stones go to several different areas and different planets and spread them out, as opposed to unify and have it undisputed. So it's very predictable from Joshua's team. I see this coming a mile away. That's my honest theory, and it makes perfect sense as I've outlined. Joshua with all the belts is a liability because if he loses, especially to a Pulev or to a Wilder, then what is Matchroom going to do? Joshua has to beat Wilder in a rematch. Otherwise, they have no stake in the heavyweight division. At least as far as a champion, Joshua would have to come back through the rankings. And then after, if Wilder fought him and beat him and knocked him out, Joshua would have to beat him in a rematch. So I think it's a little too close for comfort. So they're trying to spread the belts out. That's why they keep having Joshua say this. It makes perfect sense because, again, if Joshua wanted to fight the winner of Wilder Fury, then he doesn't have to lose his belt. He can fight in a unification, which would trump any type of mandatory. But they're trying to fool the public into feeling that Joshua has to lose a belt. And for whatever reason, Joshua's going through this. So, this is his team. This is the lead. It is what it is. Let me know what you guys think. Joshua keeps saying he has to lose a belt, but he could get it back. I have no idea why a unified champion would have to release a belt. So if someone can explain why he would have to release a belt to pursue a world champion, which would be a unification, which in turn should trump any type of mandatory obligation, i.e. you look at Wilder, WBC champion. The WBC was going to get out of the way last year in May because it was reported and they were negotiating that Wilder was going to fight an immediate rematch with Tyson Fury. The WBC, they knew the mandatory was Dominic Breazeale, but they were going to get out of the way and not call the mandatory to make the lineal champ versus the WBC champ. And because it was a good rematch and they have the authority to stand out the way and not call a mandatory to do what's right for boxing. They have that type of jurisdiction. So I don't understand why these other companies, the WBA, WBO, IBF, etc., wouldn't be able to get out of the way, get out of their own way for the greater good of boxing and have Joshua fight the winner of Wilder Fury if he really wanted to. And they would burden him with fighting a mandatory that nobody wants to see, like Usyk, who hasn't done shit at heavyweight yet, or Kubrat Pulev. So to me, this is just a ploy from Rematch Room and Eddie Hearn to leverage and, you know, split the belts. So all the pressure is not on Joshua to keep winning, who, based on his recent performances, may take another L. Let me know what you guys think. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. We working.
So if you enjoyed this video and want more content like this on the channel, you can show your appreciation by going to the PayPal donate button or the YouTube support button, and you can donate any amount that you feel is equivalent to the value of this video. Much more to come. Thank you guys for your support. Boxing Ego, the future of boxing.